Good morning, everyone. We're pleased to call this hearing to order today. Today, as you know, we're going to be discussing a topic that's priority for many of us on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and that is reducing methane emissions from landfills and how we can do that through deploying new and innovative technologies while improving waste management and increasing the use of existing solutions like composting. We'll also explore how addressing methane emissions can create new jobs, a lot of them, and provide new revenue streams for landfill operators. Over the past couple of centuries, methane concentrations in the atmosphere have more than doubled. And methane, as many of you know, is roughly 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. As a result, the super pollutant is responsible for roughly a third of the global warming our planet is currently experiencing. I'm going to say that again. This super pollutant is responsible for roughly a third of the global warming that our planet is currently experiencing, a third. This makes cleaning up methane emissions one of the fastest ways to mitigate the global warming. In fact, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, strong, rapid, and sustained methane reduction are critical to limiting near-term warming. 2 years ago, I traveled some of our colleagues to Scotland for COP26 and also with members of our staff. That is when the United States and the European Union launched the Global Methane Pledge. And this agreement represents a collective effort to reduce global methane emissions by at least 30% over the next 10 years. Today, more than 150 countries have signed on to that pledge. 150 countries have signed on to that pledge. More recently, I attended COP28 in Dubai, bipartisan delegation of our colleagues led by Senator Cardin. There, governments and private industry renewed their commitments to reduce methane emissions. And as an original signatory of the Global Methane Pledge and significant contributor to global methane emissions, the United States must continue to do its part, our part, to drive domestic methane reductions. In short, we need to provide what I call, and what probably you call, leadership by example. So why should we focus on reducing methane emissions? Well, to answer that question, let me begin by sharing the age-old story of Willie Sutton, whom, as some of you will recall, and members of our committee have heard me say more than they want to remember, I suspect. But he was a notorious bank robber during the Great Depression. In fact, he robbed a lot of banks. And finally, he was caught, taken to trial, and they stood before the judge, and the judge famously asked him, he said, "Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks?" And he replied famously, "Because, Your Honor, that's where the money is." And we can apply the same logic to today's hearing. We have to go where the emissions are and then find ways to reduce them. The good news is that we are well on our way to doing just that. And thanks to the Methane Emissions Reduction Program and the Inflation Reduction Act, the United States is advancing technologies to detect and capture methane emissions from the oil and gas sector as well. Not only will these emissions help us reduce, well, these investments help us reduce emissions, but they will also help us create jobs while recovering wasted energy, enough to power nearly 7 million homes every year. Let me say that again. That's enough to power 7 million homes every year. That's a win-win. It's a win-win for our communities, and it's a win-win for our planet. For this hearing, though, we're going to focus on the next frontier of mitigating methane emissions, and that is landfills. In other words, we're going to, my staff wrote this out for me, they like this. We're going to talk trash. That's pretty good, isn't it? You may ask yourself, why are we concerned about methane emissions from landfills? Landfills and their emissions are largely out of sight. They're largely out of mind for most people. However, landfill methane emissions are the third largest source of methane emissions in the United States and globally. So where is the methane coming from? Well, in the United States, we send more food waste to landfills than any other material. And when organic material like food breaks down in landfills, as you know, it creates methane. And if a landfill is not equipped to capture that methane, it simply escapes into our atmosphere. As many of our colleagues know, I care deeply about finding meaningful ways to reduce our waste while promoting sustainability. And to that end, I'm working alongside Senator Bozeman, Senator Capito, to pass legislation that would strengthen our nation's recycling and composting systems. And while composting and waste diversion are important tools to reduce methane emissions from landfills, it's also important that our landfills are equipped with technology that's necessary to mitigate emissions for years to come. For example, in my home state of Delaware, where one of our witnesses has been a little bit of time, a lot of time actually, the Delaware Solid Waste Authority mitigates methane emissions from their landfills with collection systems. Local businesses then use the gas that was collected to power their emissions. Many landfills across the country use similar systems to capture what would otherwise be wasted energy. As members of our committee have oftentimes heard me say, we need to find out what works, do more of that. And in this case, we also need to find ways to improve upon what is already working. And deploying innovative methods and technologies to limit methane leakage will go a long way toward reducing landfill emissions across the United States. Lastly, in order to fully address this problem, we must be able to identify where the largest releases of methane from landfills are occurring. In fact, over the last couple of years, new studies have begun to reveal the scale of that problem. Satellite monitoring, flyovers, and other enhanced emissions monitoring technologies are playing a growing role in identifying methane emissions from landfills. And these newer detection technologies can help landfill operators quickly respond to large emission events. And we'll need diverse strategies to detect landfill emissions going forward, because traditional methods have been unable to produce accurate emissions data for landfills. Let me close by reminding everybody that if we take action to reduce landfill emissions, it would have an immediate positive impact on climate, on air quality, on public health, and while also creating economic opportunity across our country, especially in our rural areas. My hope is that today's hearing will help us further our committee's understanding of how we can better detect and capture methane emissions from landfills, and what strategies can keep methane-generating organic waste out of landfills in the first place.